Hi, my name's Venora. I was born with a face my parents couldn't stand to look at. Those were my mother's exact words. So they got rid of me. No name, no photo, just a blank space where a child was supposed to belong. 19 years later, I built something they couldn't ignore. Now they want back in. But what happens when the people who buried you start digging you up only because they need you? Would you let them in, or would you show them what survival really looks like? Let me tell you what they did. And what I became. They didn't see me come in. I planned it that way. The marble lobby buzzed with heels and polished egos, clinking glasses and the smell of lemon air freshener, too clean to be real. I moved through it all unnoticed, like a draft. No one turned, no one whispered. That was the point. The receptionist glanced up, saw my badge, vendor assistant, and handed me a guest packet without looking me in the eye. I smiled once, small, and took it. No correction. Why start now upstairs? Everything gleamed. Glass, white walls, and curated perfection. They'd placed her center stage, as expected. Darlene. My mother. Her voice bounced through the main hall like a luxury commercial. Smooth, cold, calculated. She wore white. She always did for events like this. It gave her an air of purity, of elegance. She stood beneath the spotlight, hands fluttering as she thanked everyone who believed in the vision. Cameras flashed. The crowd clapped like trained seals. I stayed in the shadows, one row from the back, deliberately choosing the only seat without a name card. The panel was about inclusive beauty. Ironic, isn't it? At first, I thought I could make it through without flinching. Just observe. Watch the woman who once decided I was unworthy of her last name parade as a pioneer of something she never believed in. But then came the question. A woman, maybe in her 20s, uncertain but sincere, raised her hand. How does your company define inclusivity in a world that still glorifies perfection? The room quieted, just a beat. Darlene tilted her head, smiling wide. Her voice dropped into that sugary soft register she used on stage. Well, she said, let's be honest. Some faces don't belong on billboards. If I had given birth to a face like that, she gestured toward the woman, I'd probably wish I hadn't. Laughter, polite, sharp, expensive. My stomach didn't sink. It settled. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I sat perfectly still, clutch tightening around the rolled event brochure in my lap until it bent in half. The staff member beside me chuckled, completely unaware he was seated next to the woman Darlene had once asked a nurse to take away under cover of night. The spotlight stayed on her. It always had. She didn't see me, not just now, but ever. And that, more than the words, more than the laugh, was the part that used to burn. I had once imagined what she might say if she knew I were listening, but I was done imagining things she'd never have the decency to regret. All I could think was, she still meant it, 19 years later, and she still saw me as an embarrassment, an error she had nearly erased. I leaned back, letting the fluorescent light from the ceiling cast a cold line across my cheek. My fingers released the brochure. I smoothed it out. I remembered that hospital hallway, the nurse whispering too low. The footsteps of a man I now know was my father saying, "No one must ever know." There was no crying in that room, just silence. They didn't hold me. They held each other. And now here she was, holding court. The applause swelled again. Someone stood to cheer. I stood too, but not for her. I moved toward the exit before the final panel wrapped. The hallway was quieter than the event, muted. I slipped out, leaving my name badge behind on the table near the coffee carafes. As I reached the elevator, a young man in a crisp white shirt jogged after me. "Miss, sorry. I think you dropped this," he said, holding out a plastic name badge. It read, Victoria Miles, Vendor Logistics. I took it. "No worries," I said gently. "Keep it. Doesn't really belong to me anyway." He looked puzzled, but nodded. I stepped into the elevator and didn't look back. The elevator doors closed with a slow hush, leaving behind the scent of designer perfume and catered cocktails. I held the name badge in my hand for a moment longer, running my thumb over the plastic. It didn't sting, not like it used to. I slid it into my purse without another glance. By the time I reached the parking level, the noise from the summit had dulled to a low murmur. My driver, Raymond, was waiting by the car, the back door already open. I nodded at him, slipped inside, and leaned back against the leather seat. No words passed between us on the ride home. He knew better. The city outside rolled by like a memory I'd already let go of. Once inside my building, I didn't stop at my penthouse. I went higher, one floor above, where only one keycard worked. Mine. The rooftop office of Empire Labs was silent. I didn't need lights to navigate the space. The layout was embedded in my body now. Every step, every angle. The open glass walls framed the skyline, but I didn't look outside. I never came here for the view. I walked past the minimalist conference table, straight into my private suite. No portraits, no personal frames, just precision. Blueprints on glass boards, models, concept patents. The wall-to-wall shelf held only books, most of them with my own notes in the margins. Not once had I added a family photo. I slid the door to my desk drawer open and reached into the very back. A black envelope lay flat against the wood, labeled in gold. Alder Holdings, Private Transfer Agreement. Inside were documents most people wouldn't recognize as dangerous. Legalese layered over shell companies, dummy acquisitions, trustee signatures. But I knew every inch of it. My firm, through discreet hands, now held 41% of my mother's company. Quietly, legally, irrevocably. They didn't even know I existed in their boardroom, let alone that I sat above them. "You erased me from your legacy," I said aloud, voice low. So I rewrote the ending. I didn't need to say it twice. The truth had waited long enough. I closed the folder and stood by the window, letting the night roll over the city. My reflections stared back at me, not the girl they tried to hide, but the woman who learned how to turn silence into strategy. I hadn't always been this composed. There were years of heat and hunger behind this calm. At 17, I spent every afternoon in the basement of a public library in Brooklyn, not because I loved reading, though I did, but because it was warm and quiet, and no one asked why I was always alone. I devoured books on dermatology, social psychology, anything that helped me understand why people were so afraid of difference, why they looked at a birthmark like it carried disease. Back then, I didn't know what to call it. Now, I call it branding. My first job was scrubbing sinks in a dermatologist's office. No one cared about the girl who cleaned, but they spoke freely around me. I listened, really listened, to how patients talked about their skin. Shame, isolation, desperation. That was the seed. At 21, I filed a patent for a specialized AI-assisted dermal regeneration technology. I sold it under a partner's name, kept my identity out of it. At 23, I was the silent investor behind 3 biotech companies and the architect of 2 industry acquisitions. No interviews, no features, just movement. "They saw a girl with scars," I whispered. "I saw a market no one wanted to admit existed." The truth is, they couldn't sell to us, people like me, because they didn't want to admit we were worth selling to. My phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn, my legal counsel. "Phase 2 approved. Buyout notice ready. 48 hours. I stared at it, then replied, "No, let them come to me first." I slipped the phone into my blazer and walked back to the outer lobby. The night manager nodded silently as I passed. Downstairs, the media wall looped content from the day's summit. Just as I reached the exit, Darlene's face filled the screen. An interview clip from earlier played on a loop. Her voice, poised and clipped, echoed in the quiet space. "We built this brand on precision, on perfection. Imperfection has no place in leadership." I paused, watching her lips form the same line again. Perfection. That was always her religion. And if she hated imperfection, then she'd truly despise the fact that her company now had my fingerprints all over it. I stayed there longer than I should have, watching her face loop on the screen. Same tilt of the chin, same trained half smile, same cold confidence. I knew that expression better than I knew my own reflection. It was the look she gave the cameras when she thought the world belonged to her, and maybe for a while, it did. By the time I got back to Empire's offices, the city had shifted. Daylight had thinned into amber haze, the kind of late afternoon where everything feels a little slower, like the world is waiting for something to break. I stepped into the building just before 5. On the 15th floor, the conference room lights were already on, blinds halfway drawn. My team usually cleared out by 6, but something about the way the front desk associate looked at me made my chest tighten. "Ms. Venora," she said carefully, "they're watching something in the boardroom. You might want to just take a look." I didn't speak, just walked. As soon as I opened the door, the energy shifted. It was quiet, but not the kind that soothes. Everyone stood around the screen, eyes fixed, expressions caught between disbelief and discomfort. My lead strategist glanced back and gestured subtly for me to come in. No one else turned around. It was her again, Darlene, my mother. This time not in a promotional clip. It was a national talk show, the kind that aired mid-mornings, targeting stay-at-home executives, aspiring socialites, and high-end brand loyalists. She looked poised, of course. Smooth blouse, pressed collar, perfect contouring. But her voice had that slightly exaggerated clarity, the one she used when she wanted to sound more human than she really was. The host asked, "With this new wave of alternative beauty being embraced by younger generations, where do you stand on inclusivity within the luxury space?" Darlene didn't hesitate. "Honestly, I think it's dangerous," she said with a polished shrug. "Some people just weren't meant to be public figures. Society doesn't benefit from lowering its standards. We thrive on aesthetics, not pity." A few heads in the room shifted. No one said a word. The host, maybe sensing the tightness in the air, tried to soften the blow. "Even when they work hard to get there?" Darlene laughed. Lightly, but it stung like steel. "Hard work doesn't make you presentable." That line hit like she'd walked right into our building and whispered it in my ear. Like she knew I'd be watching, I kept my jaw still, didn't clench it, didn't twitch, just stared. When you grow up with that kind of rejection, you learn how to absorb it in layers. First, it stings. Then it settles. Eventually, it becomes wallpaper, always there, dulling everything else around it. But this time, it cracked something. The applause started to roll in. Shallow, performative claps from an audience more trained than moved. The host smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind me, one of the interns whispered, "Isn't that your—" I turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes, and said, "No, that's just the face of the company I'm about to dismantle." He blinked. I turned back to the screen. The broadcast cut to a commercial, a promo about collagen boosters featuring dancers in silk robes twirling under soft lighting. But the room didn't breathe. I walked over to the window, pushing the blinds open a little more. Seattle's skyline stretched out in front of me. Rain threatened in the distance, but hadn't fallen yet. Kind of like me. When I was 8, I'd hidden behind a velvet curtain at a fundraising event. Not because I was playing or being shy, but because I wasn't allowed to be seated at the family table. I'd overheard her then, too, laughing with a donor. "Let's just not talk about the girl tonight," she had said. "Not my daughter, just the girl. The difference between hiding someone and erasing them? About 2 press conferences." I stepped away from the window and grabbed the remote from the table. I rewound the clip, let it play again. "Imperfection has no place in leadership," she'd said. I pressed pause. Out in the hall, I could hear the shuffle of my staff slowly returning to their desks. No one mentioned it. No one dared. Back at my desk, my phone buzzed. Evelyn had already seen the broadcast. Don't respond yet, her message read. Let them dig the hole. We'll bring the spotlight when it's deep enough. I smiled. Not the triumphant kind. The tired kind. The kind you give yourself when you realize you don't need to scream anymore to be heard. I built something too. The difference is, mine includes everyone she threw away. I stayed late that evening. After the board cleared out and the screens dimmed, I returned to my office with the kind of silence that doesn't settle. It waits. Outside, Seattle's skyline blinked behind fogged glass, and inside, the only light came from the blue hue of my desktop monitor. The city had slowed to a hush, but something in me kept pacing. I opened my inbox, expecting routine. End-of-day summaries, investment updates, supplier complaints. Instead, at the top, was a new message with no subject line. The sender was blank, but the subject wasn't what caught my breath. It was the label. For your eyes only. Timestamp 1994. That year, that cursed, silent, too clean year. I clicked. It wasn't a typical file. No logo, no intro, just grainy security footage. Date stamped, hospital hallway. The audio was slightly warped at first, but quickly stabilized. A younger Darlene came into frame, seated stiffly on a bench in a pale blue hospital gown under a tan trench coat. Her hair was a mess, her posture sharp. She held a paper cup of water in one hand, but didn't drink it. Her lips moved before the audio caught up. I looked at her face and I felt bile rise, she said. I didn't blink. I swear, if we keep her, people will think we were cursed. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. Her voice was even, precise, clinical. Then Marcellus appeared in frame, silent as ever. He didn't put a hand on her shoulder, didn't shake his head, just stood. I won't raise a reminder of everything ugly in me, she went on. We fix this, today. At that point, the camera caught her wiping her hands, like she'd just washed them of something she couldn't name. I paused the video, breathed once, pressed play again. The hallway's hum filled the space between her words. The quiet after she spoke said more than anything else. The nurse walked by, holding a clipboard, glanced at them, and kept going. No one intervened. No one questioned it. They let her say it like she was asking for extra ice in her drink. I watched the video to the end. Then I played it again. Not to punish myself, but to witness it. All these years, I'd heard the rumors, the deflections, the carefully worded apologies wrapped in denial. But now I had the truth. On tape. And truth is heavier when it's no longer just your memory carrying it. I didn't cry. I wasn't 8 anymore. I wasn't 15 either. And I damn sure wasn't that girl hoping they'd change. Instead, I leaned forward, opened the secure console I'd built into Empire's mainframe, and uploaded the file. I labeled it Folder 19 Trigger, set permissions to private. But I built in a contingency. If my system was ever breached, internally or externally, it would unlock automatically and push to every major media outlet. Public. Undeniable. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted her to know she was never in control of the narrative. Let her fear the day this goes live, I whispered. Then I screen captured the moment Darlene said, "Fix this," mid-sentence, and sent it to Evelyn, my legal counsel. No body text, just the image and the subject line. Prep the statement. If this leaks, we control the frame. Within minutes, Evelyn responded. Understood. And Venora, I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a while, not knowing what to do with someone saying sorry who didn't have to. I closed the laptop and let the quiet take over again. Around 10, the knock came. Soft. Intentional. My assistant, Ava, stepped halfway in. She held a notepad in one hand, but I could tell she wasn't here for scheduling. There's a request, she said carefully. I looked up. From whom? She didn't say it. She didn't need to. Them, she said. I didn't flinch. I didn't straighten in my chair like some dramatic script. I just reached for the glass of water I'd poured hours ago and finally took a sip. Face to face? I asked. They said yes. No lawyers. Just a conversation. I nodded, slowly, purposefully. Tell them I'll see them Thursday, I said. And Ava, no one else needs to know, not yet. She nodded once and left. I stood alone in the dark, watching the monitor go black as the file timed out. The hallway footage faded into a screensaver, soft waves moving across a digital shore. So she wanted to talk. She'd built a career on public relations, on sculpted interviews and staged humility. But now she'd have to sit across from the one mistake she thought she'd buried and call her by name. The moment Thursday came, the building felt different, colder, even though the heat was on. I arrived before anyone else, bypassing my usual coffee stop, letting the silence settle into the walls before it was broken by voices I hadn't heard in nearly 2 decades. Not up close, not in person. The boardroom had been cleared per my instructions. No assistants, no photographers, no legal counsel. This wasn't for headlines. This wasn't a war room. This was something far older, something primitive. I laid the folder on the table myself. Empire Equity Conversion Agreement. Nothing glossy, no dramatic seals. Just the plain truth, printed in sharp black ink. The documents didn't need embellishment. They were weapons already. At 9:02, the elevator dinged. I didn't look up immediately. Their steps came in tandem. Hers lighter, clipped. His heavier, dragging a little now. They paused in the doorway, as if unsure they were in the right place. I stayed seated at the head of the long, tempered glass table, flipping through a page I already knew by heart. Darlene spoke first. "You've done well," she said, voice almost warm. Almost. Marcellus pulled out the chair opposite me, but waited for my nod before sitting. I gave none. He sat anyway. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet us privately," he said, clasping his hands. I offered no pleasantries, no forced smiles, just a calm, "You asked for it." There was a beat of silence, then Darlene launched in. "We've been evaluating a strategic partnership," she began, sliding over a glossy proposal, complete with market projections and photos of redesigned packaging. "We believe there's room for a collaboration between Alder's legacy and Empire's innovation." I didn't touch the folder. Marcellus cleared his throat. "The numbers are tight this quarter, but our assets remain strong. The name, our brand equity, still holds weight." Their rehearsed confidence didn't match their eyes. There was something behind Darlene's, though, like a muscle trying to remember how to smile for a daughter she never acknowledged. "And you'd like what exactly?" I asked. "A joint brand? Equity swap? Or just access to my infrastructure without real control shifting?" She hesitated. "Well, ideally a merger. Public-facing, of course. We understand your board may have hesitations, but we're open to a temporary leadership blend." Leadership blend. I nodded once, made a note with a capped pen. "You're unaware," I said slowly, "that I already own 41% of your company." Darlene blinked. Marcellus leaned forward. "Excuse me?" "I've been acquiring pieces quietly, through proxy, through trusts, through vehicles you wouldn't think to vet. 6 years. The folder I'd brought, now slid forward, held every transfer, every ledger, every timestamp. I have voting majority after next month's shareholder meeting." Darlene's face didn't crumble. It froze. Still, like the makeup on her cheekbones had been painted too tight. "This was revenge?" she asked. I didn't raise my voice. "This was insulation," I replied, "so that I'd never be in a room like this, so that I'd never have to sit across from the people who called me a liability and live like I owed them something." Marcellus tried to interrupt. "You could have come to us." "When?" I cut in. "At the hospital? When you whispered that no one could ever know? When you told the nurse to handle it discreetly? Or was it at one of your fundraisers, where I stood behind curtains like a damn ghost?" They said nothing. I leaned back slightly. "You taught me early what I was worth to you," I said. "Now you'll find out what that costs." Security knocked twice on the outer door. Time's up. I stood. They rose with me, slowly. I extended my hand to both of them because I wanted the handshake documented by memory, not media. You're free, I said, to keep your names on the company, your titles, your face on the brochures. That doesn't bother me. But just know this. They both waited. Every step you take from this point forward is on a floor I own. Their eyes didn't move. I turned and walked out, the heels of my shoes echoing louder than anything they'd said all morning. I didn't go straight home after that meeting. I drove in silence, window cracked just enough to let in the wind, not the noise. I needed space between the boardroom and what came next. A week passed. Enough time to let the dust settle. Enough time for them to realize I hadn't just shaken their tree. I'd bought the orchard. Tonight's event was held on the rooftop of the newly renovated Klein & Reed building, once a fortress of exclusion, now a jewel in my portfolio. The same luxury fashion brand that, years ago, said I didn't reflect their image, now proudly promoted a campaign on inclusive strength. I arrived through the service elevator. It was deliberate. I wanted to walk the same halls I'd once been escorted out of, holding a rejection letter in one hand and my silence in the other. Back then, I was 20. I'd shown up for a design assistant role in a blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes I'd stretched too many miles. The HR director, soft-spoken, friendly on the surface, had smiled politely as she reviewed my resume. "We're looking for someone who better reflects our brand image," she'd said. I remember folding that rejection letter and slipping it between the pages of a worn portfolio before leaving without a word. I didn't cry that day, but I didn't forget either. Tonight, I walked past that same woman near the entrance. She didn't recognize me, not even a flicker, and I didn't offer my name. Inside, everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, whitewashed minimalism. The theme of the evening was redefining standards. I nearly laughed. I kept to the edge as guests filed in, fashion editors, tech investors, a few well-placed influencers. I didn't need to introduce myself. No one here expected me to speak. I was still the silent partner. But this time, silence would speak louder than anything they'd prepared. The lights dimmed slightly as the CEO of Klein & Reed took the small platform at the center of the room. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, crisp and warm. "We've been on a journey this past year, rethinking who we serve, how we design, and what we celebrate." She gestured toward the wall behind her. "We believe strength wears every face, and tonight, we honor someone who challenged us without ever shouting." A spotlight clicked on. Framed behind glass was a letter. Enlarged, centered, lit like art. I didn't need to walk closer to read it. I knew every word. It was my rejection letter, dated nearly 10 years ago, signed by the same HR director now sipping champagne at the back of the room. Beneath the letter, engraved in simple silver type, "To the girl we underestimated." A wave of whispers rolled through the crowd. Eyes darted. I felt heads turn. The CEO cleared her throat and continued. "It is with great respect, and no small amount of humility, that we welcome our newest silent partner. She redefined the market while we were still defining our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Venora Aldridge." There was a pause, almost like the room had to reset itself. Then came the applause. No one led it. It just happened. I stepped forward slowly. Only a few feet. No microphone, no spotlight. Just enough to be seen. From the corner of my eye, I saw the HR director freeze, mid-sip. She looked like she was about to come over. Maybe say something. Something soft, something well-practiced. I offered her a single nod. Then I turned away, because I wasn't there for an apology. I wasn't there to be accepted. I was the one doing the accepting now. Later in the evening, I was asked if I wanted to say a few words. I didn't prepare a speech. I never do. I just stepped forward with a glass in hand, letting the room settle. "Some of us," I began, "were never meant to fit into frames. Not because we weren't worthy, but because the frames were too small. A few heads nodded. A few more turned toward the letter behind me. So we built our own galleries, I finished, raising the glass slightly. As the crowd applauded, Ava leaned in from behind, whispering just above the music. "We've just received a job application," she murmured, "from someone named Tylen." The name sat in my mind for a long moment. Tylen, the cousin they raised in my place, the golden boy, the one they took Christmas photos with while I sat in foster care, pretending the silence meant peace. "Well," I said, "let's see what he brings to the table." By Monday morning, the application was sitting at the top of my digital review stack. Same last name, same self-assured tone in the cover letter. But the man behind it? Very different now. Tylan Maris. The cousin, the heir apparent, my replacement. He'd once been the smiling centerpiece of holiday newsletters, the face they propped in front of a Christmas tree while I slept in temporary beds, telling myself a quiet room was better than a crowded one without love. Now he wanted a job. I read his resume twice. Good schools, clean credentials. But that same sheen of entitlement still hovered over his words like perfume that lingered too long after the person left. Ava buzzed in from the front desk. "He's here," said he was told to come in person. I clicked open my calendar. Blank for the next 30 minutes. I let her send him up. When the elevator doors opened, I saw him instantly. He looked the same, just smaller somehow. Not physically, but the confidence that once spilled from him had contracted, curled inward. He wore a suit that tried too hard. Navy, crisp, too polished for the desperation he carried. He stepped into my office and extended his hand. "Venora?" he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you like this." "I imagine not," I replied, staying seated. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat, fidgeted once. "I didn't know this was your company, honestly." "I'm sure," I said flatly. "I need a shot," he admitted. "The market's tight, and I figured maybe I could offer something here." "You never needed anything from me before," he shrugged, a little too casual. "Things change." That much was true. I picked up his folder, leafed through it like I hadn't already memorized every bullet point. "You're qualified," I said. "But this isn't a favor factory. We don't hand out second chances just because blood used to run in the same direction." He looked up, startled. "Used to?" he asked. I met his gaze. "History doesn't obligate me. Neither does family." He nodded, slow and unsure. "Fair." I closed the folder, slid it halfway back across the desk. "There's no guarantee," I told him. "Apply like everyone else. If your work stands, it stands." He didn't argue, just gave a quick nod, stood up, and left without offering another handshake. The door clicked softly behind him. I exhaled. Not from tension, from the weight of having said what I'd wanted to say since I was 10. That afternoon, I attended a private gallery, Opening Empire, sponsored at a smaller community space downtown. It featured portrait series of children born with congenital conditions, faces the world looked away from, now magnified in soft focus, framed in gold. The space was modest, the lighting gentle. I liked that it didn't pretend to be more than it was. Halfway through the exhibit, I felt someone watching me. I turned. A woman stood near the entrance, wringing her hands around the strap of her purse. It was Nevia. She hadn't changed much. Same delicate build, same shy stance. The only difference was in her eyes. She looked older than she should have. Regret will do that to a person. "Venora," she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Nivea." "I wasn't sure if I should come." "But you did," I answered. "I meant to write," she said. "I thought of you often, but you didn't," I replied gently. She stepped beside me, both of us looking at a photo of a little girl with a birthmark stretched across her left cheek, smiling with her front teeth missing. You turned your pain into something beautiful, Nivea said quietly. I didn't need it to be beautiful, I told her. Just honest. She reached out, but I didn't move. Instead, I let the silence settle between us. Not bitter, just true. We walked the rest of the gallery together. No more words, just shared space, something we hadn't done since we were children, on opposite ends of a decision neither of us made. That night, I returned to my office alone. The building had emptied out. I turned on the desk lamp and sat, pulling open the top drawer where two folders lay. One read, Hire. The other, Hold. I placed Nivea's card in Hire. Tylen's application? That went in Hold. Not because I needed to make them earn something, but because not everything that knocks deserves a key. I sat back, looking out over the quiet city. People remember you when they need a door, but I became the building, and I choose who gets a key. Just as I reached for my cup of tea, Ava tapped gently and stepped in, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. This just arrived, she said. No return address. Looks old. I took it from her, fingers brushing the dry paper. The edges were worn, yellowed. Inside was a folded document, a birth certificate. Under Mother's name, there was nothing, just a blank line. I stared at it, a part of me unsurprised. They hadn't just tried to forget me. They'd tried to erase me from the start. I stayed at my desk long after the rest of the floor had gone dark. I hadn't turned on the overheads, just the soft light from the desk lamp, casting a quiet halo across the folder in front of me. The birth certificate sat open, unmoved, staring back like a page from someone else's life. No mother listed, no father, no witnesses. Just my name in small smudged type, as if even the ink had hesitated. At first, I thought it might be a copy, some error. But then I saw the note tucked beneath it, folded 3 times and yellowed with time. The handwriting trembled across the page. Forgive me for following their orders. M. No last name, but I didn't need one. Only one person had been there that day, with a heart soft enough to doubt what she was told to do. The nurse. She must have kept a copy, maybe for conscience, maybe to prove she wasn't complicit. I held the paper for a long moment. My breath caught, not in surprise, but in confirmation. I'd always known I was treated like a problem they never intended to solve. But to see it, codified, clinical, made the silence of it heavier. I didn't feel anger, not now. I felt the kind of stillness you only get after a storm has run out of rain. By early morning, I walked alone through the quiet halls of the memorial gallery I'd built on the lower level of our building. We didn't market it, no press tours, no logos on the walls. Just a space. For truth. For faces the world never framed. Each section told a story. One wall held photos of kids who'd survived reconstructive surgeries. Another featured journal entries from foster teens who had never been adopted. And then there was the section I curated personally, fragments of forgotten documentation, discarded notes, unsigned discharge papers, and now, my birth certificate. I placed it in a simple glass case, no spotlight, no pedestal. Beside it, a metal plaque I had made that morning at a local print shop. Nothing fancy, just the words I'd waited a lifetime to say. Venora. No longer child unknown. No longer property of shame. I stared at it for a while, not blinking, not thinking. Just existing, fully, finally, without footnotes. Around 10, 2 junior staff passed through on their way to a donor prep meeting. One paused, studying the display, her brow furrowing. She turned to the other. Do we file that under legacy? I answered from behind them, calm and clear. No, file it under origin. Theirs was erased, mine just began. They nodded, neither asking what I meant. Good. That meant they understood enough to leave it intact. That afternoon, I didn't take any meetings. I stayed mostly upstairs, working through quarterly reports and checking the expansion plans for our next campus in Chicago. Numbers were clean, no surprises. I liked when things behaved. But just as I was about to shut my screen down, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. Unknown number. I played it on speaker. Her voice filled the room, lower than usual, slower. "I saw the gallery," Darlene said. "The plaque, the display. I want to speak. No lawyers, no press, just us." She paused. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I owe you more than I'll ever be able to explain." There was no background noise, no assistance, no signature sign-off. It was the most human I'd heard her sound in my adult life. I sat back, letting the message finish, and then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because healing doesn't always mean inviting the wound back in. She had my number now, but not my permission. It had been nearly a month since the gallery wall went up. Since then, no more calls. No new messages from her. Just that one voicemail I chose to let vanish into the ether. Tonight, I sat in my reading room, one of the quietest places in my home. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, warm lighting, no distractions, just memory and paper and breath. I had cleared the afternoon to go through a final stack of donations from retired care workers, letters, forms, sometimes notes written on the backs of invoices. Pieces of lives filed away and forgotten. The last envelope in the pile was unmarked, except for a return address written in a familiar, shaky hand. Althea Aldridge. It stopped me cold. My grandmother. The last time I'd heard her name, I was 17. A social worker had mentioned she was too frail for involvement. That was the polite way of saying no one had asked her what she wanted. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in blue ink. The paper smelled like old books, like cedar and thyme. "Venora, I don't know if this will ever find you. They told me it was better if I stayed out of it, that it would be confusing for you. But I never agreed with what they did. Not once. You were never a burden. You were brilliance they couldn't understand. If you never hear it from them, hear it from me. I loved you. I prayed for you every day. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." Althea, I didn't cry. Not out of strength, not out of numbness. I just let the words exist. They filled a quiet space inside me, a place I didn't realize was still empty. I placed the letter gently in my lap and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sometimes the loudest things are said in the smallest moments. Later that evening, I walked down to the memorial gallery. The halls were dimmed, but not dark. The wall lights offered a soft, steady glow. I moved with a calm that had taken me decades to earn. I added the letter to the display, right next to the birth certificate with the blank line under Mother's name. I didn't add a photo. I didn't frame it with gold, just the letter protected behind glass. Beneath it, I wrote a new plaque in my own handwriting. This family may not have claimed me, but I lived well enough to leave them nothing to inherit, except their regret. On my way out, I stopped in front of the last portrait. It wasn't mine. It was a girl, 6 years old, with deep-set eyes and a slight overbite, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her name tag was crooked, and the corners of the photo were frayed. She didn't know I existed, but I knew her, because I was her. A whisper formed in my mind. Not from grief, not from pride, just truth. She doesn't know yet, but the pain can be turned into purpose. She just has to survive long enough to own her name. The next morning, I poured a coffee, sat at my kitchen counter, and stared at nothing in particular. The sun broke through the blinds in quiet stripes. My phone buzzed with meeting alerts, acquisition notices, a thank you email from a nonprofit we'd quietly funded. All background noise. By evening, I returned once more to the gallery. No one followed. I didn't want them to. I walked the entire space again, step by step, every section carefully curated over years of collecting not just stories, but truth. At the very end of the corridor, just before the exit, a new installation had been added. My staff had pulled the most quoted phrases from the public interviews, magazine articles, and anonymous donations we'd inspired. It was a wall of voices. At the top, "You were born too ugly to be loved." That line sat there, ugly, raw, unapologetic. Below it, in bolder font, it said, "You built something too powerful to be ignored." I stepped closer, my heels silent against the stone floor, and at the very bottom, etched into the glass, were the words I never thought I'd see, not because I couldn't say them, but because I hadn't yet believed them. For everyone who was erased, this is your reminder. You are not what they left behind. You are what survived.